At my husband's funeral, I got a notification from the bank, minus $177,000. I panicked, and the next day, I discovered my daughter-in-law had spent my entire inheritance. She sent me a message. "Thanks for the new house. Now go live in a nursing home." I just replied, "Does my son know about your boss? I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled." The cemetery was quiet that October morning. The last golden leaves drifted down onto the freshly dug grave where we had just buried Michael, my husband of 43 years. I, Grace, at 68 years old, stood there long after everyone else had left, feeling as if a part of me had been buried along with him. People came up, offered their condolences, and then moved on. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, played the part of the perfect widow, crying dramatically and accepting hugs from the guests. My son, Robert, comforted her, completely ignoring his own mother, who had truly lost the love of her life. It was as if I were invisible at my own husband's funeral. When I finally returned home, I sat in Michael's favorite armchair, still holding his scent. My hands trembled as I held my phone, trying to process what had happened. Michael had died of a sudden heart attack 3 days ago. We didn't have time to say goodbye. There were no last words. He simply collapsed in the garden while watering his roses. The sound of a notification pulled me from my thoughts. It was from the bank. At first, I thought it might be an automated condolence or some formality related to Michael's death. But when I opened the message, I felt the floor drop out from under me. Withdrawal processed, $177,000. Current balance, $342. I read the message 3 times before my brain could process it. $177,000. Practically our entire life savings. The money Michael and I had saved, penny by penny, for decades. The money for my old age, for emergencies, for the grandchildren. With trembling hands, I called the bank. The representative confirmed what I already feared. The withdrawal had been authorized by someone with legal access to the account. Michael had made me the beneficiary, but he had also added Robert 2 years ago, after his first heart attack. We thought it was the right thing to do, in case something happened to me first. But Robert would never take that money without asking me. My son had his flaws, but he wasn't a thief. Then the horrible truth dawned on me. Jessica had access to Robert's accounts. As his wife, she could manage his finances. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text message from Jessica. "Thanks for the new house. Now go live in a nursing home. We don't need to take care of you anymore." The words hit me like a slap. I read the message over and over, hoping it was a nightmare, that Michael would walk in and tell me everything was okay. But Michael was dead, and I was alone, without money and without family. I stood up from the armchair, feeling all of my 68 years in every bone. I walked to the living room window, where I could see the garden Michael had tended with so much love. The roses were still blooming, oblivious that their gardener would never return. It was then that I noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked outside, but the lights were on in the house next door. Robert and Jessica had lived in the house next door for 5 years, ever since Michael loaned them the money for the down payment. Money they never paid back. I watched through the window for several minutes until I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Jessica came out of our house, the house where Michael and I had lived for 26 years, carrying a box. It wasn't just any box. It was Michael's safe deposit box, where he kept important documents. I saw her walk calmly to her car, as if she owned the place, as if I no longer existed. I ran to the front door and found it unlocked. Jessica's keys were still hanging from the lock. She had entered my home while I was at the cemetery, saying goodbye to my husband. Michael's desk was a mess, his drawers open, papers scattered on the floor. Jessica had been looking for something specific, and from the box she carried, it seemed she had found it. My legs gave out, and I sank into the desk chair. The scent of Michael still filled the space. His glasses were still on the desk, next to a cup of coffee he never finished. In that moment, something inside me changed. The grief began to morph into something more dangerous: determination. Jessica thought I was a helpless old woman, easy to manipulate and discard, but she was wrong. I picked up my phone and replied to her message. "Does my son know about your boss?" The reply came almost immediately. "What do you mean?" I smiled for the first time in days. In her haste to steal my money, Jessica had forgotten how observant a mother-in-law can be, especially a mother-in-law who had never fully trusted her. For the past 3 years, I had noticed things, whispered calls that Jessica would end abruptly when someone entered the room, texts she would quickly delete, the way she smiled when she talked about her boss, a man named Richard who, according to her, was very understanding of her schedule. I had also noticed the new clothes that appeared in her closet, expensive clothes that Jessica's secretarial salary couldn't possibly afford. The French perfumes, the designer shoes, the jewelry she claimed to have bought on sale. Michael always told me not to be so suspicious, that Jessica was a good wife to Robert, but I knew something didn't add up. A woman doesn't change her behavior that much without a reason. My phone buzzed again. Jessica had written, "I don't know what you're talking about, you crazy old woman." But I knew she did, and I also knew that the fear I detected in her first reply gave me more power than she imagined. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea and remembering the last 7 years since Robert met Jessica. At first, she seemed perfect for him. She was beautiful, polite, and made my son smile in a way I hadn't seen since his divorce. Jessica came into our lives like a spring breeze. She worked as an executive assistant at a construction company and always talked about how much she respected her boss, Richard. "He's like a father to me," she used to say, with that smile that now sent shivers down my spine. The first few months were wonderful. Jessica would come for dinner on Sundays, help me in the kitchen, and ask for family recipes. I even taught her how to make the pot roast that Robert loved so much. Michael was charmed by her. "Robert finally found a good woman," my husband would say, "one who respects us and values family." But I started to notice subtle changes. First, it was the calls during dinner. Jessica always took them, excusing herself by saying it was a work emergency. Then she started canceling Sunday family dinners, always with excuses related to urgent projects. "Richard needs me to finish this report," she'd explain. "He's a very demanding boss, but he pays me well for the overtime." Michael and Robert suspected nothing, but I had worked for 30 years as an accountant before retiring, and I knew how to recognize when the numbers didn't add up. An executive assistant's salary couldn't cover the expenses Jessica had. The wedding was small, but expensive. Jessica insisted it be at the most exclusive hotel in the city. Richard got me a special discount, she explained. I later found out there was no discount. Michael paid the full $12,000 because he wanted Robert to be happy. After the wedding, things changed drastically. Jessica began to create distance between Robert and us. First, it was subtle comments about how we didn't understand their new life. Then she started scheduling activities that clashed with our family gatherings. Robert's parents are so traditional, I once heard her say on the phone. They don't understand that the world has changed. When the twins, Dylan and Sophia, were born 3 years ago, I thought things would get better, but Jessica became even more controlling. She decided when we could see the children, what gifts we could give them, even how we should interact with them. The children need a routine, she would always explain. Too many visits disrupt them. Michael suffered in silence. He missed his grandchildren, but didn't want to cause trouble. Family, peace is more important, he would tell me. But I saw the sadness in his eyes every time Jessica denied us time with Dylan and Sophia. The situation worsened when Michael had his first heart attack 2 years ago. While he was in the hospital, Jessica convinced Robert that they needed access to our accounts in case something happened. It's just a precaution, Mom, Robert told me. Jessica says it's the responsible thing to do. She understands finances better than I do. We agreed because we feared for Michael's health. I never imagined I was signing my own sentence to poverty. Over the last year, I noticed Jessica's visits became more frequent, especially when Robert wasn't around. She always had an excuse to come into the house, to look for something she'd forgotten, to use our phone because hers had no signal, or just to stop by and say hello. Now I realized she had been studying our routines, our documents, our finances, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At 6 a.m, I made a decision. I dressed in my best black suit and drove to the office of our family lawyer, Mr. Edward Vance. I had known him for 20 years and knew he opened early. Grace, he said when he saw me enter, my condolences for Michael. He was a great man. Thank you, Edward. I need your help. Someone stole our savings. I told him everything. The unauthorized withdrawal, Jessica's cruel message, the box stolen from Michael's desk. Mr. Vance took careful notes, his frown indicating his concern. Technically, it's not theft, he explained. Robert had legal authorization to access the account, and, as Jessica's husband, she could act on his behalf. But I didn't authorize anything, I protested. I know, and we can fight this in court, but it will be expensive and time-consuming. Do you have any evidence that Robert didn't know about the withdrawal? That question stopped me in my tracks. What if Robert did know? What if my own son had participated in robbing me? There's something else, I continued. I think Jessica is having an affair with her boss. I want to hire an investigator. Mr. Vance raised an eyebrow. That's expensive, Grace, and it won't necessarily help you get the money back. It's not about the money, I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. It's about justice. That afternoon, I returned home and started looking through the things Jessica had left behind in her rush. In a drawer of the living room end table, I found a receipt from a very expensive French restaurant dated 2 weeks ago. The bill was for $340 for 2 people. Robert had been on a business trip that week. I also found a bill from a fine lingerie store for purchases over $500. Underwear that was definitely not for a mother of 3-year-old twins. But the most revealing thing was a card I found hidden inside a cookbook. A Valentine's Day card, dated this year, in a handwriting I didn't recognize. For my favorite assistant, our lunches are the best part of my days. With love, R. R for Richard, her boss. When Robert came that night to check on me, I showed him the bank notification. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. He showed no surprise, only guilt. Mom, Jessica said it was for the new house, that you didn't need that much money anymore. And it didn't occur to you to ask me? Robert avoided my gaze. She said you had already approved it, that you wanted us to have financial security. In that moment, I knew my son hadn't been the mastermind behind the theft, but he had been a weak accomplice. Jessica had manipulated him just as she had manipulated all of us for years. Robert, I said in a firm voice, Jessica is deceiving me, and she's deceiving you too. That's not true, Mom. I know you never liked her, but Jessica is a good wife. I showed him the restaurant receipt and the lingerie bill. His face turned pale, but he still defended her. There must be an explanation. Maybe it was a gift for a friend or a business dinner. And this card? I showed him the Valentine's note. Robert read it twice before his hands started to shake. Robert remained silent for what felt like an eternity, holding the Valentine's card between his trembling fingers. His eyes darted from the unfamiliar handwriting to my face, searching for any explanation other than the obvious one. There has to be a logical explanation, he finally murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. Robert, I said, with the patience only a mother can have, your wife is having an affair with her boss, and she used the money she stole from us to finance that relationship. My son stood up abruptly from the table, walking to the window, as if the fresh air could change reality. You can't be sure of that, Mom. Maybe Richard is just a generous friend. Robert's naivety broke my heart. At 35, he was still the boy who believed that everyone was inherently good. That kindness was what Jessica had exploited from day one. Son, I need to show you something else. I went up to my room and returned with the shoebox I had kept hidden under my bed for months. Inside were photographs, receipts, and notes I had been collecting without fully realizing what I was doing. My mother's intuition had made me subconsciously document Jessica's lies. The first photograph had been taken by chance 6 months ago. I was driving to the market when I saw Jessica's car in the parking lot of the Grandview Hotel at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Robert was at work that day. I took the photo because it seemed strange, but I didn't think much of it until now. Why would you take a picture of Jessica's car? Robert asked. Because it seemed odd that she was there during work hours. You had told me she had a lot of work that week. The second photograph was more incriminating. I had taken it 3 months ago when I went downtown to renew my driver's license. I saw Jessica leaving the same hotel, but she wasn't alone. An older, well-dressed man was with her. He had his hand on her back in a way that was not professional. I photographed them from my car. Robert studied the image with growing horror. Is this Richard? I don't know. I've never met him in person. But look at the time. 3:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Isn't Jessica supposed to be at the office then? My son sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the evidence piling up in front of him. But I wasn't finished yet. "There's more," I said, pulling a manila envelope from the box. "2 weeks ago, when you went to visit Jessica's parents, she forgot her purse here. I opened it because I thought it might contain something important. It was a lie. She hadn't forgotten her purse. I had taken it from her car while she was playing with the children in the yard. I had learned to be stealthy when it came to protecting my family. Inside the envelope were copies of credit card statements I didn't recognize. It wasn't in Jessica's or Robert's name. It was in the name of J. Morales Roberts. Jessica had used her maiden name along with Roberts, creating a separate identity. The expenses were revealing. Dinners at expensive restaurants, hotels, luxury clothing stores, a jewelry store where she had bought a $1,200 watch, all paid for during work hours, when she was supposed to be at the office. "Robert," I said, softly, "when was the last time Jessica gave you an expensive gift?" My son frowned, thinking. I can't remember. She says she prefers to save for the kids. But she bought herself a $1,200 watch 2 months ago." I showed him the receipt. Robert read it 3 times before speaking. "Maybe she bought it for me for my birthday or something. Your birthday was 4 months ago, and I don't remember you getting a watch." Robert's expression changed. Denial was slowly being replaced by painful understanding, but I knew he needed more evidence to be fully convinced. "Yesterday, after the funeral, I hired a private investigator," I confessed. Robert looked at me in surprise. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because I need to know the truth, and because if Jessica is cheating on you, you deserve to know." The investigator, a discreet man named Hector Ruiz, had called me that same morning with preliminary information. Jessica had been visiting the Grandview Hotel twice a week for the last 8 months. She always arrived alone and met the same man, Richard Mendoza, president of the construction company where she worked. But the most interesting part was that Richard Mendoza was married. His wife's name was Patricia. They had 2 teenage children and lived in a mansion on the outskirts of the city. A perfect family that didn't know the father was destroying their world with an affair. "Robert," I said, pulling the last photographs from the box, "this was taken yesterday afternoon." The images were devastating. Jessica and Richard leaving the hotel together, him kissing her on the lips before she got into her car. The date and time were clearly marked. 5:45 in the afternoon, the day before, the day we buried Michael. My daughter-in-law had gone to meet her lover on the same day as her father-in-law's funeral. Robert stared at the photographs for several minutes. I could see the exact moment his world fell apart. His shoulders slumped, his breathing became ragged, and tears began to roll down his cheeks. "I can't believe she would do this," he whispered, "on the day of Grandpa's funeral." "Robert, there's something else you need to know," I said, preparing for the final blow. "I think Jessica has been planning to rob us for a long time. Access to our accounts wasn't a coincidence." I showed him copies of emails I had found on an old computer that Jessica had occasionally used. I had recovered them with the help of Mr. Vance, who had contacts in tech. The emails dated back 1.5 years, long before Michael's second heart attack. In them, Jessica discussed with someone identified only as R about the opportunity we're waiting for. One email in particular sent a chill down my spine. "When the old man dies, we'll have full access. The old hag knows nothing about finances. It'll be easy to take what we need for our future." Robert read the email and his face turned green. She refers to Dad as the old man and you as the old hag. And apparently she's been planning to rob us for over a year. My son stood up unsteadily and walked to the bathroom. I heard him get sick. When he returned, his eyes were red but determined. What do we do now, Mom? For the first time in days, I smiled. Robert had said, we. He was on my side. Now, I said, we're going to get our money back, and we're going to make sure Jessica pays for what she's done. But first, I had a call to make. I picked up my phone and dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the second ring. Grace, what are you calling me for? I wanted to ask you a simple question, I said in a calm voice. Does Patricia Mendoza know her husband is buying you expensive gifts? The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes. I could hear Jessica's ragged breathing through the phone, the sound of someone who had just taken an unexpected blow. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally mumbled, but her voice trembled. Of course you do, I replied calmly. Patricia Mendoza, Richard's wife, the mother of his 2 children, the woman who doesn't know her husband, is spending thousands of dollars on hotels and gifts for his assistant. You're making things up, you crazy old woman. You don't have proof of anything. I smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Don't I? I have photographs, receipts, credit card statements you opened under a false name. I have proof you've been planning to steal from us for over a year. Do you want me to continue? Robert looked at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. His mother, the 68-year-old widow he thought was a helpless old woman, turned out to be more cunning than he had imagined. What do you want? Jessica's voice had changed. It was no longer defiant. It was the voice of someone who knew she was caught. I want my money back. The $177,000 you stole. Every penny. That money is gone. I used it for the down payment on the new house. Then sell it. I can't do that. Robert and the kids need a stable home. I laughed bitterly. You're worried about the children's stability? The woman who sleeps with her boss on the day of her grandfather-in-law's funeral is worried about stability. That was different. Richard needed me. He was going through a tough time. And what about his wife's tough time when she finds out she's married to a liar? There was another long pause. When Jessica spoke again, there were tears in her voice. Please, Grace, you can't tell Patricia. You'll destroy an entire family. Think of her children. Now you're worried about children. How interesting, because when you were planning to rob me, you weren't worried about leaving a 68-year-old widow with no money to survive. Robert took the phone from my hand. Jessica, it's me. Robert, my love, thank God. Your mother has gone crazy. She's making up terrible stories about me. I've seen the proof, Jessica. The photos, the receipts, the emails, everything. The silence on the other end was deafening. Robert, I can explain everything. Explain how you planned to rob my parents for over a year. Explain why you went to meet your lover on the day we buried my father. It's not what you think. Richard and I, we have a special connection. He understands me in a way you never could. The words were like a slap to Robert. I saw his face flush with pain and humiliation. How long? He asked in a broken voice. Robert, it doesn't matter when it started. What matters is... How long? My son shouted, surprising me. Robert never shouted. 2 years, Jessica whispered. It started 2 years ago. Robert sank into a chair. 2 years, right after the twins were born. while he was working overtime to support the family, she was building a new life with another man. The kids, Robert started to ask, but he couldn't finish the question. Dylan and Sophia are yours, Jessica said quickly. I never doubted that. But the way she said it, too fast, too defensive, planted a seed of doubt in Robert's mind. I could see it in his eyes. I took the phone back. Jessica, here's what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to return my money. If you don't, Patricia Mendoza will receive a package with all the proof of her husband's affair. You can't do that. I can, and I will. I'll also make sure the board of directors at the construction company knows their president is using corporate funds to pay for hotels for his assistant. How do you know about the corporate funds? I smiled. I didn't know, but her reaction confirmed it. I know everything, Jessica. Absolutely everything. The truth was, I had been making educated guesses based on the spending patterns I'd seen. But my experience as an accountant had taught me to recognize the signs of embezzlement. Please, Jessica pleaded, give me more time. I can get the money, but I need a week. 48 hours, not an hour more. And if I get the money, you promise not to contact Patricia. I exchanged a look with Robert. He nodded slightly. If you return every cent of the $177,000 in 48 hours, I will not contact Richard's wife. But there are more conditions. What conditions? I want Robert to have full custody of Dylan and Sophia. No supervised visits, no restrictions. My grandchildren are going to know they have a grandmother who loves them. That's impossible. I can't be separated from my children. You should have thought of that before you betrayed them all. A mother who steals from her own children's family does deserve to have them. Robert would never agree to that, Jessica said desperately. Robert took the phone again. I agree, he said firmly. I want a divorce, Jessica, and I want full custody of my children. You can't do this to me. I'm their mother, and I'm their father, a father who never betrayed them, who never stole money meant for their future, who never had an affair. Jessica began to sob hysterically. Please, Robert, I love you. We can get through this. I can end things with Richard. We can start over. There's no going back, Jessica. You destroyed our family when you decided your own desires were more important than us. If you try to take my children from me, I'll fight. I'll get the best lawyer. I'll make this so difficult and expensive that I cut her off. With what money, dear? You just admitted you spent everything you stole. And when Patricia Mendoza finds out about her husband's affair, do you think Richard will keep paying your bills? Jessica's crying intensified. You don't understand. Richard loves me. We're going to be together. We just needed time to plan how to leave our families without hurting anyone. Without hurting anyone? Robert stood up, furious. Without hurting anyone? You robbed my parents. You lied to me for 2 years. You planned to destroy my family. It wasn't like that. We were going to take care of everyone. Richard has a lot of money. We were going to make sure Grace was well cared for in a nursing home. Those words were the last straw. Robert hung up the phone abruptly. I can't believe I was married to that woman, he said, slumping onto the sofa. How could I have been so blind? I sat next to him and took his hand. Love blinds us sometimes, son. But the important thing is that now you see the truth. Do you think she'll get the money? I don't know, but I have a backup plan. My phone rang. It was Jessica again. Don't hang up, she said quickly when I answered. I have a counteroffer. I'm listening. I can get $50,000 in cash tomorrow. It's all I have immediate access to. The rest will take time. It's not enough. What if I give you something more valuable than money? I frowned. What could be more valuable than my stolen money? Information. Information that will completely destroy Richard and give you all the power you need. Robert and I looked at each other. What kind of information? Richard isn't just having an affair with me. He's stealing money from the company. A lot of money. Enough to send him to prison for decades. My heart started to beat faster. If that was true, I had more power over the situation than I had ever imagined. Jessica's revelation about Richard's theft completely changed the landscape. Robert and I sat in silence, processing the implications of what she had just told us. What kind of theft? I asked, keeping my voice calm even as my heart hammered in my chest. Richard has been skimming money from construction projects for years, Jessica explained, her voice shaky but desperate to negotiate. He inflates the costs of materials and pockets the difference. So far, he's stolen over $400,000. Robert leaned forward. And you knew about this? Not at first. But 8 months ago, he asked me to help him forge some documents. I thought it was temporary, that he was only doing it so we could be together. Forging documents? My voice turned stern. Jessica, that's fraud. It's a federal crime. I know, but Richard said it was the only way we could have a future together. His wife controls all his personal accounts. He needed money to get a divorce and start a new life with me. Robert stood up and started pacing the room. I can't believe what I'm hearing. My wife is an accomplice to corporate fraud. Ex-wife, I corrected him firmly. And this means we have more leverage than I thought. What do you mean, Mom? Think about it, Robert. If Jessica has evidence of Richard's theft, and we have evidence of the affair and the theft of our money, we have both of them exactly where we want them. I took the phone again. Jessica, do you have copies of the documents you forged? Yes, I have them. I kept them as insurance in case something went wrong. Smart, though too late. Where are these documents? In a safe deposit box at the bank, along with photographs of Richard taking cash from the office safe. Robert and I exchanged glances. Jessica had been preparing for this situation for months, documenting her lover's crimes for her own protection. All right, I said. Here is my new proposal. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, you, Robert, and I will meet at my lawyer's office. You will bring all the documents you have on Richard's theft, and you will sign a full confession of your part in stealing our money. And in exchange for what? In exchange for me not going directly to the police with the evidence of your participation in corporate fraud. And in exchange for Patricia Mendoza not receiving the photographs of her husband with you. But that means Richard. Richard is going to pay for his crimes, yes, and you are going to cooperate fully with the authorities when they arrest him. Jessica started crying again. I can't betray Richard. I love him. The same way you loved Robert when you betrayed him, my son asked bitterly. It's different. Richard and I have a real connection. A connection built on lies and crimes, I retorted. Jessica, you have a choice. You cooperate with us, or tomorrow morning I call both the police and Patricia Mendoza. And believe me, when she finds out Her husband not only had an affair, but also stole money that belonged to their children's college funds. She's going to want your head as much as his." The silence stretched for several minutes. I could hear Jessica sobbing on the other end of the line. "All right," she finally whispered. "I'll do it, but I need a guarantee that I won't go to jail." "I can't guarantee that, but I can guarantee that your cooperation will be noted by the judge when the time comes." "And your children? Can I still see them?" Robert took the phone. "You can see them, but on my terms. Supervised visits until you prove you can be a stable mother. And they will never, ever be exposed to your lies or your affairs again." "Robert, please. There's no negotiation on this, Jessica. You accept our terms or you face the consequences alone." After we hung up, Robert collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted. "Do you think she'll really bring the documents tomorrow?" "Yes," I said with confidence. "She's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes, but they also make decisions for survival." That night, I called Mr. Vance and explained the situation. He put me in touch with a federal prosecutor who specialized in corporate fraud. By 9 the next morning, we had a meeting scheduled with the authorities. "Grace," Mr. Vance told me, "this is bigger than we thought. If Jessica really has evidence of $400,000 in fraud, Richard Mendoza is going to face years in prison. And Jessica? It depends on how cooperative she is. If she turns over all the evidence and testifies against Richard, she'll likely receive a reduced sentence. Maybe probation and community service. And our money? That's another issue. If the money was used to buy property, they can seize it and sell it to reimburse you. But if it was spent on other things, it may be harder to recover." At 10 o'clock the next morning, Jessica arrived at Mr. Vance's office. She looked terrible, puffy eyes, messy hair, trembling with nerves. She was carrying a cardboard box that seemed to weigh more than she could handle. "The documents are here," she said simply, placing the box on Mr. Vance's desk. What we found inside was even worse than we had imagined. Richard hadn't just been stealing money from construction projects. He had also been bribing city inspectors to approve shoddy work. There was evidence of buildings that didn't meet safety codes, low-quality materials that put the lives of the families living in those buildings at risk. "My God," Robert muttered, looking at photos of cracked foundations and dangerous electrical wiring. "This man isn't just a thief. He's a potential murderer." Jessica seemed to shrink with every document we reviewed. "I didn't know about the building codes," she insisted. "I only forged the financial documents." "You only forged documents," I repeated in disbelief. "Do you realize that your actions alone could have resulted in the deaths of innocent families?" Richard said they were minor violations, things that didn't really matter. "Lies!" I exploded, finally losing my composure. "It was all lies, Jessica. Every word that came out of his mouth, every promise he made you, every justification he gave you, and you chose to believe him because it was easier than facing the truth." The federal prosecutor arrived at 1 p.m. After reviewing all the evidence, he told me it was one of the most comprehensive corporate fraud cases he had seen in years. "Ms. Roberts," he said to my daughter-in-law, "are you willing to testify against Mr. Mendoza in court?" Jessica looked around the room, her eyes stopping on Robert, then on me, and finally on the prosecutor. What will happen to Richard? With this evidence, he'll likely face between 15 and 20 years in federal prison, maybe more, depending on whether we can prove he knew about the safety hazards. Jessica closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Yes, I'll testify against him. Leaving the office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Michael's death. Hope. We weren't just going to get our money back. We were going to ensure that Richard paid for all his crimes. But most importantly, Robert had found his strength again. He was no longer the weak man Jessica had manipulated. He was a protective father who would fight for his children and for justice. "Mom," he said, as we walked to the car, "thank you for not giving up, for fighting for us." "I will always fight for my family, Robert. Always." 3 days later, Richard Mendoza was arrested in his office. The local news reported the arrest as the largest construction fraud case in the city's history. His empire of lies crumbled in a matter of hours. 6 months after Richard's arrest, my life had changed in ways I never could have imagined. I was sitting in the garden of my new house, a cozy 2-bedroom home I'd bought with part of the recovered money, watching Dylan and Sophia play on the swing set Robert had installed the week before. Justice had been served more completely than I had hoped. Richard was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The investigation revealed that his faulty constructions had resulted in structural damage to 17 residential buildings, endangering hundreds of families. Jessica received 3 years of probation and 800 hours of community service. As part of her plea deal, she testified against Richard and turned over all the evidence she had. She was also forced to sell the house she had bought with my stolen money. Of the original $177,000, I managed to recover $153,000. The rest had been spent on hotels, gifts, and vacations we could never get back. But the money wasn't the most important thing. The most valuable thing I got back was my family. Robert had completely transformed. The weak, manipulable man Jessica had controlled for years was gone. In his place was a strong, determined father who had taken full responsibility for raising his children. He had sought therapy to deal with the betrayal and trauma and was rebuilding his life step by step. "The kids want to know if they can sleep over here tonight," he said, sitting in the chair next to me with a cup of coffee. "Of course," I replied, smiling as I watched Dylan try to push his sister on the swing. "We can make popcorn and watch a movie." "Thanks, Mom, for everything." It was the 5th time that month he had thanked me. At first, it bothered me a little, as if he felt he had to constantly apologize for the mistakes of the past. But now I understood it wasn't an apology. It was genuine gratitude. "Robert," I said, taking his hand, "you don't have to thank me for fighting for my own family." "Yes, I do. Because when Jessica had me so confused that I couldn't see the truth, you were strong enough for both of us. You were the mother you've always been, but you were also the protector I never knew we needed." My eyes filled with tears. At 68 years old, I finally felt valued and respected by my own son. Jessica's life had taken a very different turn. After losing her job, her house, and her reputation, she had moved in with her sister in another state. Visits with the children were limited to a supervised phone call every 2 weeks. Dylan and Sophia, now 4 years old, had begun to forget the periods of confusion and tension when their parents were together. Robert had been honest with them about the situation, explaining in an age-appropriate way that Mommy made some bad choices and needs time to fix her life. Grandma Grace? Sophia ran towards me, her cheeks flushed from playing. Can you tell us the story of Grandpa Michael again? Was that his favorite story? I had been telling them about their grandfather, how he cared for his rose garden, how he brought me flowers every Friday for 43 years of marriage, how he made sure I always had my favorite chamomile tea in the pantry. Of course, my love, I said, lifting her onto my lap. Diego ran to sit on the other side of my chair. As I told them about Michael, I thought about how my perspective on loss and grief had changed. I had begun to see Michael's death not just as the end of our life together, but as the catalyst that gave me the strength to protect my family in a way I never had to before. Patricia Mendoza had visited me 2 months after Richard's arrest. She was an elegant, dignified woman who had handled the scandal with a grace I deeply admired. Mrs. Miller, she had said, sitting in my living room, I wanted to thank you personally for exposing my husband's lies. You have nothing to thank me for, I replied. I was just protecting my family. By protecting your family, you also protected mine. My children deserve to know the truth about their father, and I deserve the chance to build a new life without his lies. Patricia had turned out to be stronger than Richard had ever calculated. Instead of being paralyzed by the scandal, she had taken control of the family finances, sold the mansion, and moved with her children to a more modest house, but one filled with honesty. She had also started working as a financial consultant, using her experience managing the family's finances to help other women become financially independent. We both survived men who underestimated our strength, she had told me before she left. She was right. Richard had underestimated both Patricia and me, and Jessica had underestimated the love of a mother willing to fight for justice. Now, sitting in my garden with my grandchildren in my arms and my son by my side, I realized I had found something more valuable than the money I recovered. I had found my own voice. For years, I had been the quiet wife, the tolerant mother-in-law, the grandmother who didn't want to cause trouble. I had allowed others to make decisions for me, to treat me as if my opinions didn't matter. But when I was robbed and humiliated, something awakened in me, a strength I didn't know I possessed, the ability to investigate, to plan, to confront those who had wronged me. Grandma, Diego said, interrupting my thoughts, why do you sometimes cry when you smile? I laughed, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. They're happy tears, my love. Sometimes we cry when we're very, very happy. Are you very happy now? Very, very happy, I assured him, kissing his forehead. Robert stood up to start dinner, and the kids ran inside to wash their hands. I was left alone in the garden for a few minutes, enjoying the peace. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Mr. Vance. Grace, I thought you'd like to know that Jessica completed her first probation evaluation. She's working at a rehab center, helping other women who have made financial mistakes. Her probation officer says she's making good progress. I read the message twice. A part of me was relieved to know that Jessica was trying to rebuild her life in a positive way, but I felt no urge for reconciliation or forgiveness. Some betrayals are too deep to be healed by time. What I did feel was indifference. Jessica no longer had power over my life or my emotions. She was simply someone who had been in our past and was now learning to live with the consequences of her choices. That night, after the children were asleep in the beds I had bought especially for them, Robert and I sat in the kitchen drinking tea. "Do you ever miss the way life was before?" he asked me, "when Dad was alive and things were simpler." "I miss your father every single day," I answered honestly. "But I don't miss being invisible. I don't miss being taken for granted." "Do you feel guilty about what happened to Jessica?" It was a question I had been expecting. "No," I said without hesitation. "Jessica made her own choices. No one forced her to have an affair. No one forced her to steal our money. No one forced her to participate in fraud. The consequences she faced were the direct result of her own actions." Robert nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have stopped her somehow, if I had paid more attention." "Robert," I said firmly, "Jessica is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your children, your own integrity, and building an honest life. That is exactly what you are doing." He went home around 10 after carrying the sleeping children to his car. I was alone in my house, but I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in decades, I felt complete. I walked to my room and stopped in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the vulnerable widow who had been humiliated at her husband's funeral. She was a woman who had fought for justice and won. A woman who had reclaimed not only her money, but her dignity and the respect of her family. As I got into bed that night, I thought of Michael. "I did it, my love," I whispered into the darkness. "I protected our family. I kept them safe. And for the first time since his death, I fell asleep without tears.